Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, residents of Easton, boys and girls. This is Bill Ames, the host of the Film Connection, version 2.0, beaming to you from ECAT. We're joined today by Priscilla Almquist-Olsen first, who is the major organizer of this new effort for Film Connection. And we thank her for all her great efforts that she's done to help ECAT, creating programming and so forth. So, Priscilla, thank you and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's quite a privilege and an honor to be co-hosting with you. I know this is going to be a thrilling episode because we have the co-founder of Film Connection with us today. So take it away, Bill.
So Gino and I and one or two others started the Hockomock Film Festival competition around the year 2000. And one of the offsprings of that effort was that we started this the Film Connection, which was a regular video show, maybe once a month or something, with interesting guests coming in. And Gino, you were the host of many of those. So let me introduce Gino Del Guercio, our first guest rather, on this new series. Gino, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to see you. Absolutely. I know you lived on Center Street in Northeastern for many, many years with your wife, Carolyn, and Michelle, and Ben. And
Southeastern, Bill.
Is it in Southeastern? Oh, my God. I have been to
Southeastern.
Yeah. So, Gino's son, Ben.
And don't forget Ben.
I'm glad to talk about Ben. So Ben entered the Easton Film Festival competition after about 1 or 2 years, and he won the best drama, I think it was, because of it was a documentary about the French and Indian War.
Yeah.
You remember that you were probably co-producer on that one, I suspect, a little bit. But it's a very cute show, and that launched him on his career. Right, which he's now, we sort of digressing here a little bit, but he's out in Hollywood now, did you say?
He lives in Hollywood, and he's making a lot of commercials and music videos and a variety of things.
Living the dream. Well, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, he's doing all right.
So before we get into it, Gino, where does this find you? I see clearly that's a boat that you're in.
Yes, I am in West Palm Beach Harbor at the moment. And I've been here about a week. We were down with the boat in Key West. And in a week or two, we're going to start heading back towards New England for the summer season.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, let's get to it. Maybe you could tell the audience how you got into the business of filming, producing documentaries, which is going to be the subject of our show today.
Right. Well, I began my career as a journalist. I was a writer for United Press International for about 5 years. And I started as a State House reporter in Maine. But I had an interest in science. My dad was a physician, and the position of science writer opened up. New England science writer for United Press International opened up, and I was able to get that. And so I was working in the Boston Bureau, covering science and medicine for a couple of years. And then WGBH, they felt that they didn't have enough specialists in science to produce their documentaries. Obviously, they had the Science Nova unit, but most of the producers in that unit were not science specialists. And so they had the idea of training 18 journalists who were specialists in science to how to produce television, and then they released us to the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that in 85. It was a year-long program. It was terrific, and I continued to do some writing, but primarily I was producing and directing documentary films, specializing in science, technology, and medicine.
So the medicine, I was reading a history of documentaries a little bit on Wikipedia. And some of the earliest documentaries were made about operations in hospitals taking place.
Really?
Well, they'd filmed them. I think it was for educational purposes. You
Right,
know,
makes sense.
when you think
Yeah.
about it. So, what were some of your first assignments that you can recall? Um,
Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier. One of the biggest series I ever did was for PBS, and it was called Triumph of the Nerds, and it was a 4-hour series about the invention of the internet. And we interviewed Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Larry Ellison, all the giants, and that was a really fun series to do. We had a kind of crazy host named Bob Cringely. Bob had been a writer for one of the computer magazines, and he had a column. His name really wasn't Bob Cringely. That was a pseudonym. And most of his columns kind of satirized the computer industry and all these guys. So the unique thing about the series was it had a satirical, not a particularly satirical, it was humorous in many ways, but explained how the internet got started and talked about all the great guys. It was a very, very popular series. That spun off a couple of more series after that.
so you got
But
to meet Bill Gates and Steve Jobs as part of that.
yep, yep.
Wow.
So that was really fun.
That's a witness to
So,
history.
Yeah.
Gino, what were some of your challenges in the early days of your producing and directing?
Well, the biggest challenge, and it hasn't changed today, is funding. It's hard to find money, and generally these things cost. I mean, the Triumph of the Nerd series was a $4 million project, and so typically what you need to do is you need to get quite a few different sources to come together. And so, for instance, this was it was originally funded, or sort of the executive producers were from Oregon Public Television. But they raised some money from the National Science Foundation and other government organizations. Plus, they got some money from industry, but that still wasn't enough. So they ended up raising money from Channel 4 in the United Kingdom, which was great. We got enough money to make the series, but it introduced some interesting problems because there's a cultural difference between American public television and British public television. Now, I'll give you a little bit of an example. In one scene out in California, we interviewed, I forget the guy's name. He was instrumental in the beginning of the internet. And he was kind of a California hippie. And he had made a lot of money and had this big house overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and he had a big hot tub. So he suggested, why don't we film the interview with Bob and me in the hot tub? All right, so that was interesting. So we filmed this thing, and they were going to be naked in the hot tub. But, we had to be discreet about what we were filming.
Yeah.
And so we filmed this thing. Part of the funny thing was that the hot tub was pretty hot, and the interview went on for a long time, and they were cooking like lobsters in there. Turning all red.
Yeah.
But at the end, when you make a documentary, there are a series of edits that you go through, and you show at different stages to the broadcasters, such broadcasters. And at one stage, it's called a rough cut. So we showed the rough cut to public television, and they said, we love the series, but that scene in the hot tub is too much flesh. I mean, we just basically showed them from a long ways away, just from behind, but you saw a little bit of bare ass. So they said, can you cut out some of the nudity there? That would be fine. It would be good if just cut away earlier. We said, okay. Then the producers from the BBC said, we really like that scene with the hot tub, but can you add a little bit more nudity?
Yeah.
So you're caught in kind of a tough spot. Now, we made separate edits for the BBC or for Channel 4 in Britain and for PBS. So we just made two versions. But that's the kind of thing that you run into when you have many different funders that are all expecting to see the rough cuts and want to have some input into what you're doing.
So the rule of thumb
And
is how much per minute, right? Like 100,000 a minute or 10,000 a minute.
no, I wouldn't say that. When you put together, and the budgeting is complicated, and so basically you look at how many locations you've got, how many days of shooting you've got, how big is your crew, all these factors run into it, and you do a spreadsheet and you try to estimate what the total cost is going to be. So obviously a local documentary is going to be a lot less expensive than something that's international like this one was.
And Gino, as producer, it is your job to find all that money and to bring it all together so that you can produce the show, right?
Yes and no. The lines are kind of blurred. Technically, it would be the executive producers that are in charge of fundraising and that sort of thing. But on a smaller doc, as a producer, you would definitely be part of that fundraising team. Or what I would say is, as a producer, I might have an idea for a series, and then I'd go looking for funding. And maybe if I got, for instance, if I found $100,000 and I could go to, say, Nova and say, look, I have this idea for a series. Are you interested? And I'm coming in with 100,000. And they say, yes, we'll put in another 100,000 out of our budget, and then we'll see if we can get a few extra 100,000 from the National Science Foundation, for instance. Put that all together, and then you have your budget. But as a producer, your job is really, and it's interesting, you think of producers in Hollywood as just the money person or the management person. But in documentary films, the organization is smaller. So many, many times the producer is also the director. So I'd serve as producer director on many of the films that I did. But yeah, so the producer role is really a management role, and the director role is the creative role, saying, this is where the camera is going to be placed. This is who we're going to do. And then you might also have a host, like we had Bob Crinchley on some of the series, and he's responsible for the on-camera work and sometimes the writing. Sometimes I would do some writing. I did a series about the invention of the transistor with Ira Flato from NPR.
All right.
And Ira was the host of that, and Ira did much of the writing for that because he's a writer, and it made sense for him to write in his voice.
Yeah.
And so it really depends on the project.
Well, you see some documentaries where most of your documentaries, at least the ones I've seen, there's no real narrator. The filmmaker does not intrude on the making of the film. In other words, there's no sort of shots of the production crew, and
it really depends on what you're going for in the different styles. I've done it in many different styles.
yeah.
I did a personal documentary. I know you've seen it, about walking the Camino de Santiago in Spain with my father and brother and I.
Oh, right.
That's a very personal documentary, and we're all in it, and I'm filming it as we're doing it. So that's a completely different animal, but it's another style. So sometimes you have a host, sometimes you have, they call him the voice of God, which is like, David Attenborough narrating. That's the voice of God.
Yeah,
he
that's the voice of God.
Usually appear in the show, but you hear him, right? Or there are other ones like it. That's not quite. That style is less common these days. It's not as much in vogue, but styles come and go.
So one of your documentaries that I saw and particularly enjoyed was the one where they went up to you all went up to Canada, and there was the Greeley expedition. Tell us a little bit about how you put that package together in terms of the funding and the backstory. Is sort of interesting, I think.
Well, that was an easy one. Yeah, That was an easy one because a gentleman who's become a good friend of mine just passed away this year, unfortunately. He was a wealthy, self-made man, Jeff Clark, and Jeff just had a passion for the Arctic. And he had gone to Ellesmere Island, which is the second highest island in the world. It's 600 miles from the North Pole. And he'd just done this as a family trip. He hired a guide to take him and a few family members up. And when he was up there, before he went up, he likes to do his research. So he said to the guide, "Are there any books that I can read?" And he said, "Well, there just happens to be this guy who in 1860 went up there with 26 men and came home with 6. And he was an officer in the United States Army, and his name was Greeley, and he wrote a book about it. Why don't you go look?" And so Jeff said, I went to the local, he's from Portsmouth, Rhode Island, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He went to the library, and sure enough, this 2-volume set that hadn't been looked at in 100 years pulls out, gets the dust off it, and starts reading this unbelievable story. And he thought to himself, well, Ernest Shackleton is world famous for what he did in the South Pole. But hardly anyone has heard of this guy named Adolphus Greely, an American, who did something equivalent in the North Pole, but nobody even knows about him. And I think we should make a film about it. And I'm going to use my personal money to do that.
That was quite a
show.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Jeff had hired a British director, which didn't working out. They didn't get along. And so Jeff asked his lawyer, hey, can you get me out of the contract with this British guy? And by the way, do you know anybody that might be suitable for directing this thing? And she said, yeah, she got him out of the deal. And she said, I know this guy. He works for PBS and he'd be good. So Jeff called me up and I didn't have to raise any money, but I did have to spend 6 weeks on the tundra in the high Arctic, which for some people would not be fun, but it was a fantastic trip. And what we did was, the premise behind the documentary was we were going to tell the story of Adolphus Greely through photographs that existed, through artwork that was there, and then through recreations that were actually filmed in the places where they had been. And in addition, we were going to follow a modern expedition that Jeff was also financing to actually follow the route that Greely took through 600 miles through the high Arctic to get to safety, which is similar. That's the similar part to Shackleton. So when Greely went up there as this Army expedition, the Army said, well, in a year, we're going to come and get you. And after a year, nobody showed up. So Greely said, well, plan B is if they don't show up, we're going to get in these little boats and we're going to row our way back to at least far enough south that a ship could get us. And that turned into a very, very difficult experience. And it was in the winter. And eventually they get to this island and they just have to winter over in the island with like 1 month's worth of food for 5 months. And they just hunker down. And Greely, although he was a difficult person and his crew often didn't like him, because he was tough and difficult, he actually kept the men alive and was credited with saving the lives of at least the 6 men that did survive. And eventually he became a brigadier general in the United States Army and was one of the only people ever to receive the Medal of Honor for a non-wartime service.
Yeah, so it's an extraordinary story. And
yeah, it is. It was incredible to be up there, and nobody had ever done that trip. And these guys, I wasn't in the kayaks. We were following along in helicopters and airplanes, but nobody had ever done the trip before in the kayaks, and the kayaks were very difficult. And then at one point, my cameraman was in the kayaks, and they actually got into a situation where the ice came together, which is similar to what happened to Greely. The ice moves around with the wind and the tides, and my cameraman was actually crushed in the ice and very, very nearly died. They had to send an evac helicopter out there and get him back to civilization, and he took 6 months to recuperate. So it was quite traumatic.
Well, it's sort of like reminds me of Nanook of the North, right? Which is one of the first documentaries ever made.
That's right. That's right.
It's one of the greats. Well, speaking of old documentaries, certainly Triumph of the Will, Leni Riefenstahl. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yeah.
I
good
mean,
old Nazis. They're good for.
Yeah. Other than the political things, what goes through your mind when you see that? I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary piece of work, I think.
Exactly. Well, I mean, she was brilliant at the giant scenes and creating, action. And that's often a documentary director's job, to oftentimes things aren't that dramatic. So you're looking for drama. You're trying to figure out, where I'm going to be, when might this happen? I mean, if you're like on the January 6th attacks of the Capitol, there was a documentary crew that actually had embedded with those guys who were attacking it, and that became a film. So they had the presence to think ahead of time and think, well, this might be really interesting to see if we can make this happen. So that's what you want to do. You want to be in the right place at the right time.
Plus, the openings are important. I mean, the Triumph of the Will, where that airplane comes down over Nuremberg or whatever it is, it's like an eagle. I mean, it's sort of analogous with an eagle, but that is a historical, very compelling beginning to that movie. If one knows the parallels of
absolutely, and these days with YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Prime and all that, where people, if you don't catch someone in the first 2 minutes, they're going to flip to the next thing.
Yeah.
So you do definitely want to get something which intrigues them and gets them, like, sets up a question in your mind. What is going on? Or, I want to see what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also the key to a good film. You want to keep the action going, and you want to keep the suspense going, so someone wants to find out what's going to happen in the end. Are they going to survive? Are they actually going to make it to the place that really made it to? The film about Triumph of the Nerds, about the internet, you kind of know what happens in the end, right? But you don't really know the personal stories. I mean, Steve Jobs' personal story, but the other lesser known characters, you don't really know what happens to the end. And some of them became billionaires, and others, lost all their money. So that's kind of the interesting part of it that people stick around and want to watch. It's all about people too.
Yeah, certainly flashbacks are an old technique, right? You sort of know they tell you the ending, and then they say, let's see how it all began. And, That's the sort of that's what they teach you in speed reading. One of the techniques of speed reading is to read the last chapter first. So you sort of get the plot out of the way, and you're focused more on the characters. You know what I mean? Like,
interesting.
Why did that character survive? Or I don't remember him from the last chapter or her from the last chapter. So
yeah. Well, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about some modern documentaries. I'm not.
So Gino, tell me something. Anymore.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Priscilla. You got a question before Gino talks about?
Gino, I do. Gino, tell me, what part of being producer director do you really relish? What do you like the most? And then what are the job descriptions that you don't like?
Well, I would say it's interesting. The part that I don't like, and I was never particularly good at, is raising money.
Yeah, well, that's nobody likes that. Right?
I think some people are good at it. Maybe they don't like it, but they're good at it, right?
Yeah.
But so, unfortunately for my job, 60% of it was writing proposals and talking to committees and trying to convince. And generally, it wasn't individuals. I mean, the Jeff Clark story was unusual for me. Generally, you're working with larger organizations that are getting a lot of proposals. They put out a proposal and say, we're looking for to fund films, send your best ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might write a 100-page proposal, and 5 out of 6 of them fail.
Sure.
Which is disappointing. The field work and directing in the field can be really exciting and interesting, but very stressful. I mean, especially international, because you're traveling with teams of 5, 6 people with 20 or 30 cases of equipment, trying to organize airline schedules and make sure, and it's, your daily budgets are in the multiple thousands, and you don't have a big budget, so you're trying to make sure that you spend the money wisely. And then actually shooting and directing, it's fun, but it's very stressful. And the most of the time, once you're doing the documentary, is in the edit room. Mm-hmm. And you're piecing the thing together, working with an editor. And that can be interesting. So I like that process too. So I'd say the directing and the editing. One of the things I really liked about my career was it was so diverse. It was part writing, part directing, part financial organization, part managing people. There's always a lot of drama on a with a crew, especially when you're with a crew where you're there for days or weeks, or in the Greeley case, months at a time altogether, oftentimes in stressful, uncomfortable environments.
Sure.
So there's a lot that goes on. So it's a very interesting career.
Well, speaking of that, I remember you had sort of a team, and who was that fellow, Simon, who used to come in from England? What was
yes,
tell us about him. What was his specialty?
Simon Reeves. Simon was my favorite go-to cameraman. Simon's a funny guy. He had shot a lot for the BBC and British television in general. Was a very talented guy. And when we did the Arctic, he worked on the Arctic film with me, but he wasn't an athlete. He wasn't going to be in the kayaks.
Yeah.
So I found a guy who was an adventure cameraman. He had done a lot of mountain climbing and skiing films, was really good at just being out, in tough environments. But I wanted for their recreations, that was a totally different type of filming that this kid had never done, and Simon was great at it. So what I had done was I had planned to have, once the adventurers got to the final location where Greeley actually, all of Greeley's men starved to death, or the ones that starved to death died there. And we were actually in that location, which was a haunting place that very few people have ever been. I arranged to have Simon fly in, and we were going to film the final moments when they actually arrive in the kayaks, and then all these recreations up there. Well, when you're up there for that long, it's nice to have some alcohol. And we had been there quite a long time, and the alcohol was running low. So I said to Simon, hey, when you come, bring some alcohol, please. We're running low. And so Simon arrives, and he's got one tiny little quart of rum or something.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, Simon, where's all the alcohol? Oh, well, I forgot to get it at the last minute and all. And then I thought I'd get it when I was up in Nunavut, which is the native Canadian territories, but it's dry. There's no alcohol sold up there. And so suddenly he discovers that he can't actually buy it when he gets there. But the worst part was he gets there and he drinks the rest of our supply. We were totally dry.
Yeah.
So there were no cocktails in the evening.
So Gino, before we get to those issues you raised for discussion, I remember the other one I thought was quite fun that you did was that wedding video in Colorado, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I wasn't a wedding videographer, but this was a deal that I couldn't turn down. It was a very wealthy family. And actually, I taught at Boston University for 25 years as an adjunct documentary films in their science department, in their science journalism department. And this kid was one of my students, and he had graduated, and he became an extremely successful wedding photographer. And then they'd fly him around the world to do weddings at $10,000 or $20,000 a pop. And he called me up and I said, hey, look, I've got this client. She wants me to do the photography, but they're looking for a wedding video to do as well. Are you interested? And he said, yeah, and they pay this. And I said, yeah, I'm interested. So the wedding was at the top of Aspen Mountain. And they had rented, in the summer, it wasn't ski time, but they had rented the entire top of Aspen Mountain for this giant wedding and party. But it was a bit of a disaster. We made it work in the end, but we're up there and it's getting to be evening and they're going to do the ceremony just as the sun is setting over the mountains of Aspen and all. It was just gorgeous. And this huge windstorm comes up and practically blows everybody away.
Yeah.
But, as a documentary director, that's kind of your life, right? Things happen. And we made it work in the end, but it was quite a party.
Yeah, I thought that was a wonderful video you made. I saw it.
Yeah.
And well, you said earlier before we digressed, you had a couple of examples you wanted to talk about, or
yeah, I want to talk about documentaries that people should see now,
Okay,
and things that I think are really interesting. One of the things that one of the ways to find good ones is basically the Academy Awards, because they have a documentary category, and they're often good and very interesting. And this year had some very interesting ones. One was by CNN. I think CNN isn't really known for the quality of the documentaries. They'll do topical films. This was both topical and quality was really good. And it's a film called Navalny. Navalny is about the guy who ran against Putin in the last elections, and Putin poisoned him. And he was poisoned when he was on a trip in in Russia, and then was on an airplane flying back when he suddenly became extremely ill. And the airplane landed, and they got him to a hospital in time and saved his life. And then he was in a Russian hospital for a while, still really not doing well. And somehow they convinced the Russian government to let him go to a German hospital to help try to get him better. And the German hospital discovers that he's been poisoned with a type of nerve agent that is only used by the Russian military. So they had proof that it was an inside Russian military job. And then he actually, and this is all on camera, they find through all sorts of internet magic, they actually discover the names and the phone numbers of a team of underground agents that were known for doing these poisonings. And he calls them up and pretends to be a member of Putin's team, yelling at them for why they screwed up and didn't actually kill Navalny. This is Navalny talking to these guys.
Yeah.
And the first couple of guys are kind of savvy to it and hang up on him. But he finally talks to the chemist who actually made this nerve agent. And he says, yeah, I know, we screwed up. We thought that he would be dead in 2 hours, and the flight was supposed to be 3 hours. So we figured that he would die before the plane landed, but they landed early and they got him out. So he admits to this whole thing. So that's a really good documentary.
That is good.
Another one that's this year was one of the documentary shorts, which I really liked, which is called The Elephant Whisperer. And it's sweetest documentary. It's about this couple that live way in the back jungles of India, and the Indian government has hired them or given the job to take care of a baby elephant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just about them taking care of the elephant. It's the sweetest, and the elephant is the cutest thing you've ever seen. And apparently it's difficult to take care of these elephants. That most of them, the baby's mother had been killed, and most of them died because it's difficult to take care of them. But these people were just totally dedicated to it. And they're a very old Indian couple, and they just live a very ascetic life out there taking care of this elephant. It's really sweet.
Wow.
The other documentaries that are really interesting are about volcanoes. There was a documentary called "The Fire of Love," and it's I took notes on this. The couple is named Katie and Maurice Kraft, and these people were volcanologists, and they went all around the world studying volcanoes and taking film of volcanoes and getting extremely close to volcanoes. And eventually they're killed by the volcano.
Wow.
The film itself is kind of amateurish in the way it's shot, but the couple is really interesting in their relationship with each other and their passion about the volcanoes. But the interesting part I found about it was another documentary has been done about the exact same subject by a very famous documentary filmmaker named Werner Herzog, who you've probably
I've seen
heard
that
of.
one.
Yeah, you saw the volcano
Guadalupe? It's about Guadalupe?
No, this is all about volcanoes and the crafts and people who study volcanoes.
No, but I think
And
Werner Herzog. I was thinking about Werner Herzog's.
yeah, his is very similar to the other one.
Yeah.
And it follows this couple around.
Okay.
But it really shows the difference in a director's ability. And the irony is that this one Fire of Love is not particularly well made, but was nominated for Academy Awards. Werner Herzog's was not nominated for the Academy Award, but from a filmmaker's perspective, is a much, much better film. Beautifully shot, incredible shots of close-ups of volcanoes, mostly using the crafts footage, but a great director using that footage in a way that makes it really compelling.
So wait a minute, Werner Herzog used there? I'm getting
Both
confused.
both directors used this couple's footage,
Oh, okay.
but the films are completely different. So it's an interesting analysis of how a director can shape a film.
Yeah.
And there's a third volcano film that people should really see if they're interested, and it's called The Volcano, and that's by Rory Kennedy, who was the youngest daughter of Bobby Kennedy, and she's become quite a well-known filmmaker. And that's a film about a volcano in New Zealand that was a very popular tourist place. So tourists used to go all the time. They had all these tourist boats that would go, and they'd walk up to the rim of the volcano and look in. Well, one day the thing goes off, and there are 47 people at the volcano at the time.
Ooh.
And so it's about that event. Many, many people were killed. There's a lot of footage from the people and their cell phones that were right there. But more so, it's about the efforts to rush in and save all these people that had been severely burned.
Mm-hmm.
And by the heroics, the emergency services in New Zealand told their rescuers, don't go in, it's too dangerous, you can't go. But a number of people who were outside the emergency services volunteered to go, and they pulled a lot of people out of there and really saved their lives. So that's a really cool volcano film.
It's called The Volcano?
It's called The Volcano by Rory Kennedy.
Rory Kennedy. Right.
The other film that people really need to see, which is incredible, is called My Octopus Teacher. Have either of you heard or seen about this?
Yeah, I was having lunch with a fellow today, and he was telling me that it was an absolutely fascinating film, Octopus.
It's incredible. So it's a very personal film. Again, we talked about whether you include yourself as the director in the film. And the director, producer, I don't have his name offhand, but he had been a nature cameraman, nature photographer, filmmaker, and had been burned out and went back home to South Africa where he grew up, living on the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And he started doing free diving, diving without scuba tanks. And one day he comes across this small octopus, and he would swim every day in the cold water, and he'd see this octopus multiple times. And after a while, the octopus got to know him, and he began interacting with the octopus and actually became friends with the octopus. And the octopus would come up to him and climb on him, and he really learned about this animal. And I won't tell you the end of the story, but it becomes very dramatic. It's a very powerful story. But I tell you, you watch this film, you're never going to eat octopus again.
That's what my friend said. He said,
I know. No more calamari,
no
Bill.
more Oceana calamari for me if I see the film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, calamari is a squid. It's not exactly the same.
But
these octopus, they don't live very long. They only live 2 years. But they have to learn. They're not instinctual animals. They learn how to catch crabs and things, rather than just a lot of animals just do it by instinct. But they figure out the stuff out, and he showed this octopus actually learning how to catch different animals that at first it didn't know how to do it, but it figured it out.
So octopuses have multiple brains, right? Don't they have a brain in somewhere else? And
I think that what they say is they have a distributed brain. So all their arms have sensors in them that are like mini brains that are actually manipulating their brain. And their brain, like us, if you want to move your fingers, the signal goes from your brain to your fingers. But apparently in the octopus, the brain sends the signal, move your arms, but then the arms themselves move independently because they have their own little brains telling them what to do.
wow.
That's my understanding. It's probably pretty an oversimplification.
No, it's good though. It's good though.
So, may I ask, Bill? I'd like to ask Gino a question.
Sure.
Gino, you probably know my son is a Hollywood film producer, and one of the things he has stressed to me over the years is how important it is to build relationships, and that's how you gain the trust and respect of people in the industry. And that's how you advance your projects. So tell me, in your experience, can you remember a time when that was so critical to one of your productions?
Oh, absolutely. When people are trusting you with millions of dollars, they want to know somebody before they trust them. So just like in Hollywood, a lot of it is going up through the ranks. And some people say, well, I have this great idea and I have a little bit of money and I want to do this. But yeah, that's nice. But what have you done in the past? How do I know you? Who have you worked with? Who can I talk to that's worked with you and give me recommendations that I know personally? And a lot of it is establishing relationships with broadcasters. I had somewhat of an advantage because I was actually trained in this program at WGBH. So I knew the executive producers from Nova from the very beginning. I had good relationships with people at Channel 13 in New York. So yeah, unless you have executive producers and people who work, the interesting thing about PBS is that they don't have that much money, but even less so, they have less airtime. Because if you think about it, really the slots for documentary films are Monday through Friday for a 3-hour slot from like 7 to 10 o'clock.
Mhm.
But most of those slots are already filled up with shows like Nova or Frontline or American Experience. So there's very little opportunity when PBS actually has open positions to slot your film in if you're making a one-off or a short series. So you have to know the right people, and they have to know you, and you have to get meetings with them. It's like Hollywood too. You have to be able to have a relationship with someone so that you can actually call them up and say, can we have lunch? I have something to talk to you about. And that's often the hardest thing to do.
Mm.
It's interesting. These days, it's a little bit different with YouTube and maybe not Hollywood films so much, but certainly documentaries where you can create something small. And if you get an audience through social media, you might be able to then convince a bigger organization who wants to get that audience to bring you on and to work with you on a film.
Sure.
I don't have that much experience with that. I mean, I've been out of the business for 10 years now, but it is changing in that way. The other big change is when I started, we were filming on 16 millimeter film, and a roll of 16 millimeter film, you have to buy the roll and to process it was several $1,000s for 10 minutes. And when you shot the roll, it's not like a video today where you actually see what you're recording.
Mm-hmm.
You're just recording on film, and you have to know that if I have this particular light level and the light is coming from here, when it's developed, it's going to look like this. And so that took a lot of skill, and there weren't very many people who knew how to do that. So it was easier to get work because it was a small group. Then when personal video cameras came out and they got really good, and by the way, the video camera on your cell phone is far superior to the video cameras that I had in the Arctic 20 years ago.
Hmm.
I mean, you can get tremendous footage out of that. So the tools and the computerized tools to edit have become so much cheaper and so much easier to use. And every college in the country now has a film program.
Yeah, because film is unique in that it combines writing, technology, teamwork. So for a college or teaching situation, it's a very robust. It's not just point and shoot.
Finance and planning and everything. Yeah. So actually, I tell people, who are interested in doing a film program, look, you may never become a director or a producer, but that skill set is going to help you in many different ways and many different jobs. It is transferable to a whole lot of different things.
Yeah, exactly. So, Gino,
and I was going to say, Bill, in addition to colleges offering film programs, high schools are doing that. Now, 25 years ago, actually 27 years ago, my son, Eric Olsen, he was became a director in his own high school because an English teacher who taught a communications course got a $50,000 grant to build an entire television studio with mixers and editing machines and all of that right in the high school. So that is what gave him the desire to go to college and become a film major. And he went to Ithaca College. They had a one semester optional program in LA where you interned for 3 days, went to classes for 2. Mm-hmm. And this is 27 years ago, and amazing. And he was interning with Joe Silver's Silver Pictures, where Danny Glover and Mel Gibson were making Lethal Weapon 4 at the time. Mm-hmm. And he stayed there for 11 years, albeit not making a lot of money, but he learned the business. And he still has a tremendous passion for film. So high schools now are getting into the act.
Well, that was the whole Hockomock Film Festival concept, but
yeah,
a lot of times it's fluke. Some schools get traction, some don't. It all comes down to the individual who sort of wants to champion film.
Yes.
I always thought it was a mistake for high schools. They've been so I love high school musicals and high school plays, and most high schools have an active theater program, but fewer, and maybe it's changing now, but fewer actually have a very strong active filmmaking program.
Yeah.
And to my mind, it's much better skill to have than theater, because I love theater. I go to see live theater as much as I can, but there's not a whole lot of theater. Whereas filmmaking, everybody uses film in one way or another. If it's not Hollywood or documentaries, it's YouTube videos or corporate videos or medical videos, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
So if at least you know how to do it, it's as important now as knowing how to type and how to write.
Yeah.
Because in your job someplace, one of these days, someone's going to come to you and say, hey, we need this little explanatory video or this little marketing video. Do you know how to do that? And if you know how to do that, you're gold, and you can jump in there and make something that your boss is going to be impressed with.
And they have YouTube videos that can coach you on how to do it. So the learning process. So Gino, we're getting close to the hour, but all the rage these days is AI systems and AI chat and things like that. And you see occasionally, I see things about how the AI systems can enhance the movie making process. In other words, can put on the table creative ideas on a particular subject that one would never have come up with, for better or worse, right?
Yeah. I have no idea about that. I'm living in a sailboat, Bill.
Tell me what you really think, Gino. Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty interesting. It's one of those things that sort of makes interesting reading, but you see it.
Well, what I would say is that watching these films that are now partially animation and partial real life, like the new Avatar, are unbelievable. And you can't tell the difference in what's going on. So what's going on in Hollywood films and the use of computer technology and animation is extraordinary. And it really have you seen the new Avatar, Ocean World, I think it's called?
No, I'll write that down, Ocean World.
Oh, yeah. James Cameron, the first Avatar, which was, I think it made more money than any movie in history. Last year, he came out with another one, which takes place in the ocean. And it said it took him 10 years before the technology was perfected enough to actually create these underwater scenes that looked realistic.
Well, it is extraordinary.
It's a great ride. It's a fun film.
Well, Gino, this has been great. I hope maybe we can come back, visit with you if you get some nice. I like the sound of your reviews of these documentaries, because everybody is all over this Netflix Prime, what to watch next thing.
Yeah. So. Oh yeah, definitely. I went to the movies yesterday because it was raining, and I saw this film, John Wick, which was the most violent thing I've ever seen in my life. It was terrible.
Yeah.
To my mind, I hated it. And there's so many good documentaries out there that really are worthwhile, and you learn about the world and different people, and they're entertaining. And so I'd be happy to come back and sort of give my list of things that people should watch and why.
Absolutely.
Well,
that would be great.
Gino, we'd be happy too to have our next interview with you on your boat.
Your new boat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gino, I think you should be sitting on the sitting outside by the wheel with the sunset or something like that. But either way is great.
Maybe I want to thank you for your life during a storm.
Gino, I want to thank you so much for coming on board and christening the new series here, Film Connection. And I also hope that
thank you so much, Priscilla.
Yeah, and I hope we can interview Ben too, because he's been doing so many wonderful things in Hollywood with his commercials, his short films, and I believe he's doing some animation also.
No animation. What he's been working on, he's working with a company called Racing Cowboys, and they specialize in footage from moving cars. They have this big crane that sits on top of a sports car, and they're flying through the streets of Los Angeles on these things. His mother and I are a little worried about this.
Yeah.
But when's Eric coming on? That's what I want to see.
Soon.
I'm I'm sorry, what was that?
Eric, when's your
When is
son
your son going to be on?
Oh yeah, he's volunteered, and he also is going to try to get some of his friends. One of his oldest, best friends is Jama Sarah Collet, or is it Collet Sarah? He's from Barcelona. He's a director, and he did all the Liam Neeson action movies.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I remember when he was struggling 2 years ago, and I visited Eric at Christmas, and I brought Jama a bottle of Swedish glögg. And
good old glögg.
Glögg, yeah, he loved it. But it's wonderful to see how directors, producers, actors, how they don't give up on their dream, and they keep going. They're persistent, and they love the journey. They just love.
That's key. Never give up
about their work.
That's
really hard. Never give up.
That's
never give up. Thank you, Winston Churchill.
Yeah. Keep calm and carry on.
You.
Okay. Hi, Priscilla.
Thanks, Gino.
Okay.
So Penelope, why don't you sign off for us?
And Gino, I was just going to say, it's been a wonderful and interesting conversation we've had today, and I'm certainly going to look up all those documentaries that you pointed out, and especially the one on Navalny, because that's been advertised a lot on CNN. So, yeah.
Well,
and now, of course, he's in poor health. Yeah. So, okay. Well, thanks again.
Great. I'm going to
maybe we'll get together when I'm in Easton next time, I hope.
Absolutely. We'll get you online.